Imagine this. You're in love, newly married, and full of hope. Your husband promises you everything you've ever wanted: your own home, a peaceful life, and children who will fill your world with joy. You trust him with your heart. But after the wedding, something changes. You don't move into the home he promised. Instead, you're taken to his family's house, where you're no longer a wife, but a maid, a servant at the mercy of his family. Your life becomes a living hell, and the man you love doesn't protect you. He joins in. This is the disheartening story of Miriam, a woman who was lied to, betrayed and broken by the people she trusted the most. What she endured will shock you. Endless abuse, cruelty, and unimaginable pain. But don't think this is where her story ends, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Let's dig in. The day of Miriam's wedding was filled with joy. She had met Idris 2 years earlier at a family gathering. Idris had been sweet, gentle, and everything Miriam ever wanted in a husband. They had spent hours talking about their future together, about the home they would build, the children they would raise, and the life of peace they would live. Idris had told her, "Once we are married, you will move into the house I've been preparing for us. Just you and me. It will be a place filled with love." Those words echoed in Miriam's heart as she stood beside him at the altar. Her friends and family watched with pride as she became Idris's wife. Her parents were happy she had married into a respectable family, and her friends envied her. To them, Miriam was living the dream: a beautiful wedding and a charming husband who promised her the world. But Miriam had no idea what awaited her after the wedding. After the celebration, Miriam expected Idris to take her to the house he had promised. She imagined their own little space where she would decorate, cook for just the two of them, and build a life together. But instead, Idris drove her to his family's house. It was a large old house filled with people: his parents, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, cousins. Everyone seemed to be living under one roof. Miriam's heart sunk. She thought it was temporary, maybe a quick visit to show respect to his parents before they moved into their new home. But after days turned into weeks, Miriam realized the truth. There was no new home. Idris had lied to her. This was where they were going to live. The morning after the wedding, Miriam woke up early to prepare for her day. She thought she would be given time to adjust, to settle into her new life as a bride. But before she could even stretch, her new mother-in-law barged into the room. "Wake up, Miriam! You're no longer in your father's house. There's work to be done." Miriam, still in disbelief, followed her out of the room, confused. She had just gotten married. Shouldn't they allow her some time to rest? But Idris's mother had no such plans. She shoved the bucket into Miriam's hands and ordered her to fetch water from the well. "You're now part of this family. A wife has responsibilities," her mother-in-law said coldly. "There's no time for sleeping in." From that day, Miriam's life became one of endless labor: fetching water, cooking for the entire family, washing clothes for everyone: Idris's parents, siblings, even distant cousins who lived in the house. There was no break. No rest. At first, Miriam tried to keep a positive attitude. She reminded herself that she was married now, and this was her new life. But with each passing day, the work became more unbearable. Her mother-in-law was relentless. No matter how much Miriam did, it was never enough. "You missed a spot on the floor," she would snap. "This soup is tasteless. Don't you know how to cook?" Her hands were raw from scrubbing clothes. Her back ached from carrying heavy buckets of water, and her spirit was crushed under the weight of constant criticism. One night, after a particular grueling day, Miriam finally gathered the courage to confront Idris. She sat him down, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Idris, this isn't what we talked about. You promised me we would live in our own house. You promised it would just be us. I can't keep living like this. I'm treated like a maid." Idris looked at her, his expression indifferent. He shrugged, as if her words meant nothing. "You are my wife now, Miriam. This is your duty. What did you expect? This is how marriage works in Nigeria. You should be grateful you have a family to take care of. Stop complaining." Miriam's heart broke. The man who had once whispered promises of love and happiness now stood before her like a stranger. He didn't care about her pain, her exhaustion, or her broken spirit. He had lied to her, trapped her in a life she never wanted, and now he was telling her to accept it. Months passed, and the stress of her situation began to take a toll on Miriam's body. She became pregnant, hoping that a child might bring some joy to her miserable life. But even pregnancy did not spare her from the endless chores. Her mother-in-law did not care that Miriam was carrying her grandchild. She continued to demand Miriam fetch water, scrub floors, and cook for the entire household. One evening, after carrying a heavy bucket of water from the well, Miriam felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She dropped the bucket and fell to the ground, gasping for air as the pain intensified. No one came to help her. Idris's mother simply glanced at her and said, "Get up, there's work to do." That night, Miriam lost her pregnancy. A doctor told her that the physical strain had caused the miscarriage. But when Miriam told Idris and his family, they showed no sympathy. "You try again," was all Idris's mother said, her voice cold and uncaring. "These things happen." Miriam wept for days, the pain of losing her child too much to bear. But the worst part was that no one in the house cared. Not even Idris. He barely acknowledged the loss, as if it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. As the months dragged on, Miriam's situation worsened. She was isolated from her friends and family, trapped in the house where she was treated like a slave. Whenever she tried to defend herself, Idris's family would gaslight her, making her feel like she was the problem. "You are being too sensitive, Miriam," they would say. "This is how things are done. Every wife goes through this." Miriam began to doubt her own mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was the problem. Maybe she wasn't strong enough to handle marriage. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. She knew she couldn't continue living like this. One evening, after a particular cruel argument with Idris's mother, Miriam collapsed from exhaustion. She had been working all day, scrubbing floors and cooking meals, when her body finally gave out. She fell to the ground unconscious. When she woke up, she was in the hospital. The doctor told her she had suffered from severe exhaustion and stress. If she continued living like this, he warned, it would kill her. But when Miriam returned home, Idris's mother didn't care. "You are weak," she spat. "No wonder you can't carry a pregnancy. If you can't handle your duties, maybe you should leave." That was the moment Miriam knew she had to escape. She had nothing left to lose. One night, while everyone was sleeping, Miriam packed a small bag with nothing but a few clothes and the little money she had saved. She left the house. She didn't even know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay there any longer. Miriam walked for hours until she found the bus station. She bought a ticket to the nearest city, far away from Idris and his family. For the first time in years, Miriam felt free. Months after Miriam's escape, things took a dark turn for Idris and his family. The once powerful, arrogant household that had treated Miriam like a servant began to crumble from the inside out. It was as though the very foundation of their lives was collapsing brick by brick, and they couldn't stop it. Idris's business, which had once flourished and given him the sense of power he loved to flaunt, was the first to crumble. What seemed like a simple financial hiccup turned into a full-blown disaster. Contracts were cancelled, deals fell through, and debts began piling up faster than he could even count. His former business partners, who used to admire his supposed success, began avoiding him like a plague. "Where is the money, Idris?" one of his angry investors demanded during a tense meeting. Idris stammered, trying to give excuses. "It's just temporary. I'll make it up. I need more time." But time was no longer on his side. The debts piled up, and soon the reputation he had built was in shambles. His accounts were frozen, his properties repossessed, and his once lavish lifestyle became a distant memory. Within months, the proud man who had once turned his back on Miriam found himself broke, drowning in debt and desperate. Without money, the harmony that once held the family together shattered like glass. The family members who had once lorded over Miriam, demanding she serve them day and night, began fighting amongst themselves. Idris's siblings, who used to rely on his business to keep their lifestyle afloat, grew resentful. His brothers, who had once sat back while Miriam did all the work, began blaming him for their misery. His eldest brother screamed, slamming his fist on the dining table one evening. "We depended on you and now you failed. What kind of a man can't even run his own business?" Tension grew between his sisters and his mother. His sisters had never lifted a finger to help around the house, and now, without Miriam there to do the housework, the household became chaotic. The house was dirty, the food was never prepared on time, and the daily comforts they had taken for granted were now gone. You and your brothers brought this on yourselves. Idris' mother spat angrily at her daughters. We should have never let that girl live. Look at the mess you are in. Without the servant they had turned Miriam into, they were left to face the reality of their laziness and lack of unity. The stress from his financial collapse and the constant family feuds began to weigh heavily on Idris. He was no longer the proud, charming man who had once fooled Miriam with sweet promises. Instead, he became a shadow of his former self, pale, exhausted, and increasingly isolated. Late at night, he would sit alone, his head in his hands, wondering where everything had gone wrong. The weight of his guilt for what he had done to Miriam hung over him like a dark cloud. He couldn't escape the feeling that this was all his fault. Deep down, he knew that when Miriam walked away, she had taken the only real piece of goodness he had left in his life. His health began to fail. He developed a constant nagging cough that wouldn't go away. His once strong body grew weaker as sleepless nights, stress, and guilt slowly ate away at him. Doctors couldn't explain his sudden decline in health, but Miriam's absence was like a curse that had stripped him of his strength. Idris' mother, who had always ruled the house with an iron fist, faced her own downfall. The sharp, biting woman who had once controlled every aspect of the household was now helpless. When Idris' business failed, the money dried up, and with it, her power over the family slipped away. No one in the community respected her anymore. The same neighbors and relatives who had once come to her for favors now turned their backs on her. Gossip spread like wildfire, and people whispered behind her back about the family's fall from grace. She was so proud, one neighbor said, shaking her head, treating that poor girl like a slave. Now look at her begging for help. Idris' mother's health also began to deteriorate. She grew weak, bedridden, unable to maintain her former position of authority. The same woman who had mocked Miriam's pain, who had struggled off her miscarriages, was now facing her own suffering, alone and powerless. As things grew worse, Idris knew there was only one person who could help: Miriam. He convinced himself that if he could go find her, if he could beg for her forgiveness, maybe she would take him back. Maybe she would save him from the disaster his life had become. So he began searching for her. He asked friends, visited places they used to go, and even tried reaching out to her family, but no one knew where Miriam was. Miriam had disappeared like a ghost, leaving no trace of her past behind. Idris' desperation grew with each failed attempt to find her. He became obsessed, certain that if he could just see her one more time, he could fix everything. But Miriam was gone. While Idris and his family fell apart, Miriam was building a new life, far away from the toxic household that had almost destroyed her. With the help of a kind woman she had met after leaving Idris, Miriam started a small business selling handmade items. Her life was simple, but it was hers, and that was all that mattered. For the first time in years, Miriam felt free. She no longer woke up in fear, no longer walked on eggshells around cruel in-laws or a distant husband. She had found her strength again, something Idris' family had tried to take from her but failed. One afternoon, as Miriam sat in her shop, she heard rumors about Idris' family. "Have you heard?" a customer said, leaning in as if sharing a dark secret. "Idris' family has gone bankrupt. They've lost everything." Miriam's heart didn't raise. She didn't feel joy or satisfaction. She simply smiled, knowing that the peace she had now was worth more than any revenge. Months later, Idris finally tracked Miriam down. By then, he was a broken man, thin, frail, and barely recognizable from the proud, confident person he once was. When he walked into Miriam's shop, his heart nearly stopped at the sight of her. She looked stronger, happier, radiant, even. The sight of her living a life of peace and contentment while he had lost everything hit him harder than any words could. "Miriam," he said, his voice trembling, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Please come back." Miriam looked at him for a long moment, her expression calm. There was no anger, no bitterness whatsoever, only a quiet strength. "Idris," she said softly, "I found myself when I left you. I won't give that up again." And with that, she turned away, leaving Idris standing there, a man who had lost everything, not just his money, his family, or his health, but the only person who had truly loved him. Miriam's story is a powerful reminder that life has a way of balancing the scales. Those who betray and mistreat others will one day face the consequences of their actions. No matter how much power or control someone thinks they have, karma always finds a way to even the score. What would you do if you're in Miriam's shoe? Would you take Idris back, or would you leave him to face the consequences of his action? This story teaches us one thing: sometimes walking away is the most powerful thing you can do. The end.